Good morning. I would like to begin our board meeting this morning.
He's here.
Rob Marino, do we have any public speakers this morning?
Mr. Chairman, we have 8 public speakers this morning. I would like to remind them all to please keep their remarks to 2 minutes. The first speaker is Deborah Cohen. Ms. Cohen will be followed by David Paul Gerber.
I am a commuter who uses the Staten Island Express bus system and strongly oppose the planned redesign. I would like to bring to your attention 2 overlooked issues. First, removing stops on Staten Island will endanger the lives of commuters. Staten Island is a borough where many streets simply have no sidewalks. In such areas, if a bus stop is removed, commuters will be forced to walk in the street against oncoming traffic to get to their new bus stop. The MTA and DOT have done no research into this issue when planning this redesign. I would like to remind all of you that as members of the Board of Directors of the MTA, you have a fiduciary duty to uphold the MTA's mission statement. That mission statement expressly directs you to safeguard the lives of the people you serve. If you approve this plan redesign without looking into this issue and researching it, you will be breaching your fiduciary duty. Second, the plan redesign inexplicably removes any route from the Father Capodanno Park and Ride to central Lower Manhattan. This change was only announced in late May after all of the open houses had been completed, so riders had no chance to voice their objection. It will have far-reaching negative impact and will disparately impact disabled riders in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Commuters who currently use the Park and Ride to get to either Western or Central Lower Manhattan will be forced to drive to Highland Boulevard and search for parking on residential side streets that are already highly congested. It will increase traffic, chaos, and frustration, and many riders will simply give up and decide to take the free ferry where there is a parking lot, which will reduce MTA revenue. There is a simple solution to this problem, and it is to add back in a route from the Father Capodanno Park and Ride to Central Lower Manhattan along Church Street and Broadway, which was originally part of the planned redesign. Please fix this egregious error. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. The next speaker is David Paul Gerber. Mr. Gerber will be followed by Philippa Grisha.
Good morning, Board. Prayers go out to Frank Sabano, the conductor who was viciously assaulted by a thug at Prospect Park Station. Right now to the subway action, to the bus action plan itself. The plan needs stringent enforcement of NYPD who refuses to cooperate. You don't have to go there to these locations. You simply go to Google Maps Street View, or you can go into DOT traffic cameras and see the offenders themselves, such as in Livingston Street in downtown Brooklyn, on St. Nicholas Avenue between 145th Street and 143rd Street in Upper Manhattan. Around the 43rd precinct by the BX5 bus route, there are cars, personal NYPD personal cars and other marked cars illegally taking up bus stops. The pervasive action, which is called placard abuse, and it's also a subject account on Twitter that I've also stated previously, shows that the abuse is so rampant, not just NYPD, but for all levels of government, from federal, city, and state. In fact, New York City DOT's traffic study of downtown Jamaica found that of the 175 legal parking spaces available for placard users, 800 were taken up instead illegally parked by placard holders. New York City Transit needs to implement the bus action plan, as NYPD does not help citizens in reporting 311 complaints. If you report a 311 of a vehicle with a placard illegally parked, NYPD files a false report, allegedly, and it's been documented numerous times on Twitter. If I myself have tried to work with a City Hall staff in the Bronx about the Mashul Parkway Greenway, and for years, and they said they'll take care of the problem has never been taken care of, how would New York City Transit be able to help the NYPD if the NYPD will not cooperate? Please think about that, Mr. Byford and Mr. Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gerber. Philippa Grisafi to be followed by Jason Pinheiro. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Felipa Grisafi. I am a 20-year express bus rider. I have with me an online petition to stop the revisions of the express buses until more and better service is provided. I've garnered 1,017 signatures. You must return the 50% of bus routes you have eliminated for over 14,000 or 43% of island riders along the East Shore. This corridor has sustained 80% of all the cuts, or 4 or 5 buses were eliminated. Highland Boulevard currently serves 5 of the top 10 most ridden express bus routes. 1 has been completely eliminated. The 3 others have been merged. The only park and ride on the East Shore will only service 2 limited routes instead of the current 4 broader ones. Instead of increasing routes and service to the only East Shore park and ride we have, and our quickest way off of the island, 1 route has been eliminated and the other moved to the much heavily traveled Highland Boulevard. And unlike other boroughs, Staten Island does not have alternate parallel routes that can speed up travel time. There is no true express bus service on the entire East Shore. We have succeeded in creating shorter routes and quicker access off the island for the South, West, and North Shore riders, but punished the 43% of East Shore riders by doubling almost all of our commute times. We still have a 10-mile bus stop route with 22 stops. Half of our routes have been eliminated. The current commute for the X1 traveling 10 miles from Eltingville Transit Center to Verrazano Bridge at 10 a.m. on a good day is 1 hour and 15 minutes. That is what it currently takes me to get from my home in Great Kills the 20 miles to my office in Tribeca by driving myself to Park and Ride. Once this change is implemented, it will take me and thousands of other riders along the Highland Corridor close to 2 hours to commute each way. It currently takes me 90 minutes to get home via Father Cap. These revisions are not improving quality of life for a large portion of the riders along the East Shore. I will not have that extra time with my family that you insist I am getting from these revisions. Instead, I, along with thousands of others, will be spending an additional 60 to 90 minutes a day on the bus, increasing my daily commute from 2.5 hours to almost 4. Can I continue?
You must wrap up at this point, Ms. Grisafi.
You must also first correct the major traffic issues that regularly plague us, easily adding 20 to 30 minutes along our commute. We ask that you extend the bus lanes on Staten Island on Highland Boulevard to Bay Terrace with the rollout. And please start taking steps to create a park and ride along the East Shore so that we can truly have express bus service on the East Shore and not bus service that is 3 stops from the Verrazano Bridge. You're causing riders with these changes to walk additional time, take alternate modes of transportation, and something that's very difficult for the disabled.
You have to
15 to
conclude
30
now,
minutes you
Kathy.
say you are saving us will be spent on additional travel time. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Jason Panero to be followed by Maurice Lynch and then Mr. Schroeder. Good morning.
Good morning on the day after my birthday. A couple of things. One, I would love the board to investigate why are school buses used in Long Island when the Long Island Railroad is disrupted. Second of all, I'm in favor of the Staten Island Express bus redesign. This is way overdue, and I hope that each and one of you guys vote yes on this measure. And I want you guys to pressure the Port Authority to wrap up any projects that involves MTA's assets and vote no to build the Air Train LaGuardia at Casey Stingle Bus Depot has been rumored over the social media networks. And I hope that we'll still have confidence in you guys to doing the good job that you guys have been doing throughout this year, and congratulating Joe Lola on his first year of coming back to his old job. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Maurice Lynch. Then H.P. Schroeder, then William Henderson. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maurice Lynch. If you have your mobile devices, you can go to Google and Google MauriceLynchMusic.com. I wanted to speak to everyone today. I wrote a song called A Train Express. The song was produced by Ray Chu, who everyone knows. He's the musical director for every major award show in the United States. And I want the MTA to champion my song. I think the song is fabulous. Of course, it was produced by Ray. So, Maurice Lynch, L-Y-N-C-H. And if you go to Maurice Lynch Music, you'll read up on me. And I did speak briefly to Andy. And I think that's a great way for MTA to raise money. I think you're trying to figure ways. Music makes money 24 hours a day. If it's on the radio, if it's on whatever. So my thing is, if we come to an agreement, the thing is I own the song, I wrote the song, so we can share some royalties. We can get the song playing all over everything on radios and every other platform. I'm going to play some of it. I don't think you can hear it.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's the legendary way. Many hardcastles travel this way. On the A-Train Express. Just hear those turnstiles scream, and the sound of that steel scream. There's always a scheme as you listen to that train sing. I give you the music. On the A-Train Express.
And that's some of the song, and the song is called A-Train Express. And what I want to do is to figure a
ask
way
you to
we
wrap
can
up,
use
Mr.
that
Lynch.
song
Your time is up.
in the city of New York for a promotion. And I think it's great. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
again. Sorry about that.
Glad this is somebody else's problem now.
Good morning. My name is H.P. Schroer, a veteran of World War II. When I first appeared before this committee, I was a lonely voice and asked you to give veterans the same discount as given to seniors. For the last 7 months, and after forming You and I Become We, a veteran advocacy group, others joined me. Despite our gaining supporters and creating a surge in the public's interest, you notified us in March no veterans discount would be allowed. The public is entitled to know how with a $19 billion budget and without making any analysis, you determined that you could not afford to give a discount. In plain words, you decided a veteran who served and sacrificed for this country was not worth 2 cents. For that's what our analysis, which I've left with each of you, proves it would take to fund a discount. Fortunately, our message resonated with others. Last Friday, Fair Fares was approved by the mayor and the New York City Council. What you may not know is that there is a provision within this that offers veterans attending college a 50% discounted card. This is the first time in 100 years that non-disabled veterans will be getting a discount. We congratulate all of those, Mr. Brown, his organization, who worked so hard in getting this provision passed. But there's more work to be done because 95% of the veterans will not be eligible and they lose the discount when they leave school. This is a nonpartisan issue. I ask you to recommend to the governor. He passed 2 bills languishing in the state legislature, S 2164 and A 1770. Each offers all veterans a 50% discount. Let's hope we don't have to wait another 100 years.
Thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Schroer. William Henderson, then Mary Parrison Lavelle, and then Omar Vera. Morning.
Good morning. I'm here to speak on behalf of the New York City Transit Riders Council. I am here to urge you to approve the Staten Island Express Bus redesign project. I want to emphasize the importance of the redesign as a first step in reimagining the city's overall bus network. We're all aware that increasing traffic and declining bus performance have led to lower ridership. Changes in the bus network to adapt to these new conditions are long overdue. Fortunately, NYC Transit recognized the need for change and embarked on a planning process with robust public involvement that developed an express bus plan to address today's realities. Previously, I've spoken to the elements of the redesign that provide for more effective and efficient bus service. I won't repeat these comments, but this redesign means that riders will spend less time waiting for delayed buses and spend less time on buses traveling between Staten Island and Manhattan. The alternatives to the redesign are unacceptable. Allowing existing service to deteriorate as traffic and changing development patterns take their toll only leaves a larger problem for the future. Halfway measures such as adjusting bus stops to reduce running time improve performance but would do little about the root causes of decline in efficiency and reliability of express bus service. Although this redesign can't be expected to satisfy every rider, the authors of the plan have solicited and taken into account input from many riders. It's now time for the good of the system to move forward with this redesign, understanding that adjustments can be made in response to unanticipated issues or changing conditions. From there, NYC Transit can advance its ambitious plans to bring the citywide bus network into the 21st century and to restore surface transportation as a vital part of the NYC transit system throughout our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mary Parison Lavelle, then Omar Vera, and then Max Scholl. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Parison Lavelle. I'm the chair of Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. President Eng, Tim Ellis has told you and elected officials that the reason the Long Island Railroad sold 4 old locomotives to the New York and Atlantic Railway for just a little over $45,000 was because New York and Atlantic exercised their right to buy them under the 1997 lease. Well, I'm here to tell you that this lease gave the MTA the right to disapprove the sale, and you can see that on page 3 of your handout. If anyone did not get a handout, I have extras here. And under Public Authorities Law 2897-7, the MTA Board and the public are entitled to lawful sales process, a lawful sales process that requires proofs and justifications for a below fair market value sale like this one. Then the MTA Board must make a written determination that there is no reasonable alternative. However, this board had many alternatives to the sale, which now promises grave, needless, long-term public harms. I ask you to block needless public harms from the sale by following through on the MTA's plan to replace all remaining 8 switcher locomotives New York and Atlantic uses with Tier 4 switcher locomotives, included the ones you sold. You already have enough in New York State appropriations to replace 5, with more funding to come. The MTA has indicated that it is prepared to call into question the business integrity of New York and Atlantic and whether it should be permitted to continue providing rail freight service over Long Island Railroad's network. Yet Long Island Railroad engineered a giveaway of 4 locomotives to New York and Atlantic Railway.
To wrap up, Ms. Parris.
Pending 6 years of funded state policy. And New York and Atlantic's tainted 2013 procurement resulted in 2 problematic Caterpillar Progress Rail Services green locomotives. Yet New York and Atlantic and Associates are still preferred and privileged in Long Island Railroad's 2018 RFP. And New York Atlantic Railroad's lobbyist, John Castellini, is still lobbying for green locomotive procurements.
Harrison, you know we want to be fair to all the other speakers. Please continue.
All right. I ask you to please condemn violations of public trust and public authorities law, and please insist on an open, fair procurement under state finance law for the cleanest Tier 4 locomotives. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Omar Vera and Max Scholl. And our final speaker is Vijay Dugal.
Good morning, MTA Board, and welcome to the June edition of your board meeting, full board. Yep, we got a lot of things to discuss, but for starters, I'd like to once again reiterate my support for the Fast Forward plan by President Byford. Very ambitious. I fully support it. Thank you so much. I love that video. In fact, I showed it to a bunch of friends, your video at Hudson Yards. Second, well, this complements the Fast Forward plan for rehabilitating our transit system. But like I said, this whole delay has got to stop. I almost didn't get a chance to speak at all today because I was on the 5 train and it kept slowing down, braking, going in the middle of the tunnels. And like that's completely unacceptable. Which brings me to the report the New York Times with the top transit journalist Emma Fitzsimmons and her team did regarding why we're such in bad shape. Now, Chairman Loda, congratulations on your first year anniversary as chairman for return. I know you're hesitant to critique your former boss, but former Mayor Giuliani and former Governor Pataki are largely responsible for why you're in a mess right now. They defunded the MTA for 20 years, and now we're feeling the effects of it last year. They need to step up and they need to apologize to all of us for their mismanagement. And I'd like to thank Emma for that video explaining why our system is in such a bad shape. We need to move forward, not backwards, and I feel like that's the way to do it. And with that, that's all I have to say this month. Thank you so much, and enjoy the first day of summer. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Max Scholl, and then Vijay Dugal. Good morning.
Morning, MTA Board. How you guys doing today? First of all, you should definitely run with that A-Train song. Wow, that was sick. That was great. Just wanted to start off by saying thank you to Commissioner Trottenberg, an MTA Board member. This morning, we actually rode bikes in together here on the bike train, which is a weekly bike ride that we do in preparation for the L train shutdown. We're trying to get people comfortable riding their bikes because biking is obviously going to be a huge part of the mitigation plan before the L train shuts down. And obviously, the other subway lines won't be able to accommodate everyone, and the biking during the shutdown will only be as safe as the infrastructure provided. Thank you to the DOT for that. And of course, buses will be the other major part of the plan. I implore the board to run as many buses, electric especially, as possible, and to keep a tight eye on the operations of the buses so, people are actually incentivized to use them. Of course, we need to weigh the needs of everyone involved in the L train shutdown mitigation plan, including local communities and the 200,000 riders that, go under the East River Tunnel every day. But I think, if we really incentivize people to use buses, use bikes, then that way it'll have much less of an effect on those communities. If we keep people moving, then that's the best way to keep the impact low on the communities. So that's about it. Thank you again for letting me speak, and I implore you guys to do the best plan you can on the L train shutdown. Thanks again.
Thanks, Mr. Shaw. Vijay Dugal. Morning.
My name is Vijay Dugal. You probably remember me from last couple of meetings, 3 meetings. I had distributed a handout how to save the individual fallen into the train tracks. And that question is still on the table. This is not an isolated incident. It's a very important question to be asked. And what an ironic situation that in the last handout I illustrated this is very vulnerable to the people, particularly with disabilities, people walking in the wheelchair and so forth. And now I read the news 2 weeks ago that an individual with a walker fell into the train tracks and died in the Jackson Heights station. That's where I take the train from. And this is very, very disturbing, gentlemen, and you are not asking the question, what MTA has done within the last 10 years that will prove that whatever system they have in place to enhance the security of individual and show the results. 5 years ago, I think there was a plan. They say MTA has some system working on, and nothing is there. And there's a plan, funding dedicated to the security feature, security measures of to how to save lives. And I don't see any plan. What I was to say. Yeah, actually, I did file a Freedom of Information request. How many people died during 2017 and 2018? And, that is the first question you guys should be asking. Every month you stand on this meeting, 4 people more are dead. And you are not asking that question. Very disturbing. And I'm locating the family of the individual who died, and she will be here too. And then you can answer me why that a person has to die, despite the fact that I illustrated that that individual could be saved. And it really barely costs nothing. And Mr. Lora, you promised that Andy will call me, never called me. He sent me a rejection letter. And I would like the opportunity to present to the board. That's all I'm asking. I'm asking the opportunity to make a presentation to the board that how the system works, and if there, I invite the engineers from the MTA, why the system will not work. I mean, there's reason to be skeptical, but there is reason not to be skeptical. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dougal. That, Mr. Chairman, concludes the public comment.
Thank you. This morning, I want to welcome everyone to our meeting. This morning, we're going to have two presentations. We're going to begin with a presentation from our working groups on procurement with Chuck Merdler, and then another one on how to contain construction costs. That'll be presented by Scott Reckler. Next month, we'll hear from Veronica Vanderpool on paratransit and Ira Greenberg on subway accessibility. I do want to mention that following each one of these presentations, we'll be allowed to ask questions of the board. Will be allowed to ask questions. And then following that, I'll have a statement about a couple of things that are in the news lately. In any event, so let's begin with Commissioner Merdler.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to update the board about the progress made by the Procurement Task Force since our March report. This task force is focused on simplifying, streamlining, and expediting the current procurement process, one of the key elements in the Agility and Accountability Foundation area in President Byford's Fast Forward Plan. The team at New York City Transit, led by Stephen Plokchucky, and with focused and dedicated management coordination provided by Pat Foy, a great example has been provided in terms of what is possible when there is will and imaginative leadership prepared to secure constructive change. The task force included Commissioners Brown, Vanderpool, and Weisbrod, each of whom have done much to make possible demonstrable change. In March, we reported that this board management working group had developed a work plan with the goal of shortening the timeline for operating service contracts at New York City Transit by 165 days. This would reduce the overall process from 278 days to 113 days, and there may well be room for more. In the past few months, the team has refined and started implementing some of those initiatives to accelerate the procurement process. Right now, it is projected that approximately 146 of the 165-day reduction can be achieved without legislation or regulatory changes, when accompanied with minor investments in the relevant departments and subject to customary approval processes. In the following areas, reductions have already been achieved. Reduction in the time required for legal review of contract documents by introducing the ability to electronically transmit and mark up these documents. Reduction in the time for procurement to validate the price submissions in received bids, and processing the information into and through PeopleSoft, the operative computer program. Reduction in the time by streamlining the process of assigning MBWE goals and reviewing utilization plans. There are additional areas where we know there is an opportunity and have efforts underway. Reduction in the time for procurement to prepare bid documents, answer the questions of bidders, and develop staff summaries. Reduction in the time for risk management to assign insurance requirements and review insurance submittals. Reduction in the time to prepare biddable scopes of work by developing a pool of technical scope writers. Reduction in the time for the staff summary approval process by introducing an electronic routing and approval system. All of these initiatives and more will be tracked and monitored via a dashboard to give management insight into the lead time and the processing time for each aspect and part of the problem. To date, a reduction of 25 days of the 146 has already been achieved in 2 months. By reducing the time for legal review, assignment of MWBE goals, and the time to process and verify bids after opening. What are the next steps in addition to implementing the Phase 1 expediting process? We will begin by examining the ways to streamline the RFP process at New York City Transit. This has become the process of choice to permit examination and consideration of such vital qualifying factors as bidder capacity to deliver in a cost-effective and timely manner, leadership to provide quality control, and a host of factors in addition to price. Time savings in this area should expand the field of those who would bid, improve competitiveness, and ultimately improve price and deliverables. At the direction of Chairman Loda, we will continue to examine the ways and means the critical procurement reforms can be extended to the other operating agencies. Indeed, I should add that Steve Plukchucky and his team have already begun the educational aspect of that critical process. Let me be clear. At the direction of the Chair, we are serious about achieving construction change in the procurement process, and management and staff have demonstrated their commitment to that goal and their will to achieve it promptly, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mertler. Are there any questions for Chuck? Yes.
A question, but first a comment. Chuck was being overly modest in terms of his own role here. Yes, I think this was really the progress to date is really extraordinary, thanks to Pat Foy and Steve Plachaki. But Chuck Mertler really has put in an enormous amount of work on this. So I really want to thank you, Chuck, for the work you've put in on this. I think, any of us who've been in government for any period of time recognize how frustrating the procurement process is generally. And it is just one of those things where we all believe that we can make substantial progress on making it more efficient, and it is really difficult to do it. And so the progress here is, I think, especially worthy of credit. And I would just ask, in terms of monitoring the progress as we go forward, that we not only monitor how we reach the goals of saving 165 days as a process matter, but also as we do procurements, make sure that those procurements are, as they go through the process, are meeting the new deadlines, because I think that's often, just as a cultural matter, a very difficult thing to achieve, and that's an important thing to monitor as well.
Absolutely correct, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would also like to thank Mr. Mertler for his leadership on this issue. It's an outgrowth of his years of advocacy as a board member on these matters. Inevitably, the details are going to matter. So I'd be curious to know more about, for example, streamlining MWBE goal assignment and the utilization plan, how that takes place, how it unfolds, and how we achieve operating agency buy-in.
Mr. Ferrer, the basic problem in many of these areas is how you move the paper and how you get things done that can be done more efficiently through the use of 21st century electronics and the like. And so the key is to get rid of the paper shuffling, to cut the time frames and say, get it done. And that's the thing we focused on day one. Now, Pat has been going through this process together with Stephen, and not only moving that, but moving the attendant pieces around it.
Yeah, Vice Chairman, the point I'd want to add is this does not represent in any way a step back from the agency's MWBE goals. We're committed to the governor's 30% goal. Michael Gardner is diligent and effective on every project, every procurement in terms of establishing goals. What we want to do, as Commissioner Moore would suggest, is just get it done quicker within the goals that the governor and the agency have set.
I would also like to thank Commissioner Merdler for his hard work and MTA President Pat Foy on this and Steve Plachocki. I'm just wondering, of all the things, Chuck, that you mentioned that you're working on, do any of them have the potential to open up the field of bidders so that we don't have the exact same folks bidding on everything?
That's a prime objective from my standpoint. People are dissuaded from bidding when they see the following facts. One, that the paper shuffling and the quantity of paper that they have to produce and attend to is so enormous that it in and of itself is a barrier. Secondly, when they see that the same people keep getting the contracts, they are equally discouraged. And lastly, and this is a critical fact, when they see a new change of attitude, and it is beginning to form, that people want to help, that people, I can tell you of instance after instance I have seen, where the people around Steve Plachocki's team go and answer the questions of prospective bidders before they bid so that they feel assured that they will get a fair shake. That's how you get competition. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
I'd like to thank Commissioner Merdler for the work he's done and will continue to do in this area. I actually believe in coming back and seeing the sclerotic nature of our procurement process, where, you know, the bureaucracy and the time element involved was just unnecessary, and that this is going a long way towards eliminating that. So I want to thank Pat as well as Steve Plachocki for this effort. And I also want to see this move on to the railroads and to the bridges and tunnels, because I think it's very, very important that we become better at this and that we also engender more competition. Talking about competition, our next presentation is from Scott Reckler, who will talk about what we need to do on our large capital programs, as well as all of our contracts.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Actually, a lot of the comments in our interim report dovetail well with the report on the procurement process. And I wanted to first thank the working group, Commissioner Schwartz, Paley, and Commissioner Trottenberg for the help and focus on this, and everyone in terms of the people at the MTA recognizing this is a priority. Clearly, Jano Lieber has played a key role, as is Zoe Davidson from his office, but most of the staff, not just within their office, but throughout the organization, have been engaged in trying to put forth some of these recommendations. I just want to take a step back before we delve into this and sort of highlight the importance of this, because, you know, President Byford came out with his Fast Forward book, which, by the way, I have a signed copy of too. Here, so prove it out. There we go. So I got it. And I'm a big believer that this is critical for us to be successful, as is the investments that we're making in our commuter rail. And you know, the key is, frankly, if we don't do it, my personal view is that we're at a tipping point. And if you look back in 1990, when New York City was facing high crime rates, people were afraid to be here. And I think that our transit crisis is not too different. You know, here's a Time magazine cover called "The Rotting Apple," and they did a poll, and 60% of the people that were polled were planning on leaving New York City. And when I talk today to business leaders and people that work in the city, when they talk about their biggest challenge, it's commuting, it's congestion, it's being able to get to work on time, get the doctor's appointments on time, get to school on time. And so we're going to find ourselves at that same tipping point, that the very thing that has fueled the growth of our economy, which is people wanting to live here because of the quality of life, reversing itself if we don't solve this problem. And we're not going to solve this problem without money. We've all had this discussion. But we can't ask the public to give us money if we can't prove that we're going to spend that money wisely. So not only do we need to reinvest in our infrastructure, but we need to reinvent how we invest in our infrastructure and our system. And that's something that, as we've looked through this program and this task force over the last 6 months, we've been keenly focused on, particularly areas where the MTA can solve problems themselves. And that's the first phase, was focusing on the areas that are things that we have control over. And when you go back and look, there's no single factor or even a single person responsible for how broken the system is now. And no one can even defend the current system, and no one's happy about it. The contractors, the men and women that work at the MTA, men and women of labor, they're as frustrated as we are when we hear different stories and different challenges that come forward. And everyone would like to see this system work more effectively and be in a situation where they can be more productive and use the system to help us get there as we go forward. And frankly, it's an accumulation of a lot of bad decisions and some well-intentioned decisions to create protections for the public that have ultimately ended up having a lot of challenges and made a very complicated system. So it's broken, and frankly, we've been our own worst enemy in terms of finding ways to do things more effectively. So what I'm going to try to do is go through 3 areas that we've identified as the problem, to be in a situation where we know we can find ways to deliver projects on time and on budget that we control, identify the problem, and then the recommendations that we're making to solve those problems. The 3 problems, just quickly to review, is our contracts. We have contracts that are unbalanced and not commercial, and very, very difficult to navigate. And so when we talk about competition, one reason you don't have competition is because we're asking people to sign on to contracts that, frankly, none of us in this room would want to sign on to the contracts that we're asking people to sign on to. The second, which I think we're all aware of, is we have this Byzantine bureaucracy of a lot of competing groups within the MTA that make it very difficult to get anything done. It's like, think about a maze and trying to work their way through the MTA in a process. And so we need to streamline that, and we need to have accountability in someone that makes a decision, and we'll talk about that. And the third is the project management, and that starts all the way back at when we actually begin scoping out the project. What is the cost going to be? What are the opportunities to value engineer it? And how we're going to ultimately implement it as efficiently and effectively as possible. So let me take each one of those points and move from there. So starting with the unbalanced contract. So as I said, fewer and fewer groups are willing to bid on MTA contracts because they are not commercial right now. If they do bid, they ultimately will put bids in, assuming the worst case scenario, assuming that some of the risks that aren't even their fault are going to be put on them, or they're going to have decisions made against them that are going to greatly increase the cost. So when you talk to the contractors that are in the field, they automatically put a factor, a safety net, on top of their bid. And it could be 25% or more. So if you went out and bid, you're adding 25% or more to that bid just to be able to deal with the risk adjustments and the challenges that exist within our contract. And even when you think about the contract, one thing that's amazing is what was news to me. Almost every agency within the MTA has different contracts, and some have multiple contracts themselves. So we're not even dealing with one standard contract as we go forward. So we have some suggestions in terms of fixing this. And the first thing that the team did was there was a task force that was set up and I think we had this discussion about in my last presentation, which is that the existing contract can't be just revised. You can't just keep skinning back the onion because the core itself is where it's rotting. And so the task force was set up to bring in people at the MTA as well as legal counsel that specializes in construction contracts, both commercial and public sector construction contracts, to figure out what is the right commercial contract. That if we were starting from scratch, what's the right amount of risk that should fall on the contractor, and what's the right amount of risk that should fall on the MTA itself, and try to come up with a standard contract that would make sense. And they've gone through this, and there's a series of elements. And the biggest element here is there's certain things that are risks that are clearly not in the contractor's fault. Like, for example, if we tell them that we're going to give them access to a track, if they don't have access to the track, they're now going to have that cost, which is really our fault. So if we allocate that risk appropriately, they'll be able to appropriately bid that, and we'll be accountable for having to do our part of that as one example in the mix here. So in going through this is about a 25-page memo of identifying proposed changes to a new contract. And what we would recommend as the next phase here is that a new contract is written that is a balanced commercial contract, that is user-friendly to the contractors that are out there, so we can bring more contractors in to bid, and that it becomes the standard contract throughout the entire organization so that everyone knows what they're working on and don't have to reinvent the wheel or relearn the terms of that contract. The second area that we have is the dispute mechanism, which is also in the contract. Right now, if there's a dispute that the contractor has with the MTA, that dispute is ultimately resolved by an MTA employee. So think about it. Now, if you're having a dispute with someone and you now need to go to one of their peers to solve the dispute, you would think that's somewhat biased. And so you're not going to believe that you get a fair hearing for what that dispute is. And so what we recommend is that we bring in a single third-party neutral arbiter to decide disputes under an expedited basis. So if you're a contractor, you know you're going to get a fair hearing, get it quickly, and be able to get back to work and focus. And I think this will again help us make sure we stay on schedule, enable more companies and contractors that want to bid with us as we go forward. And the third fix that we're recommending, which is right now, if there's an issue in the dispute within a contract, for every contractor, they're asked to put up bonds for 100% of the cost. What that does is it immediately reduces the amount of contractors that can actually participate. So when people ask, why don't we have contractors? There's very few contractors that have the balance sheet to put up 100% of the cost in the form of bonds. So we have a series of recommendations to relax that rule to a standard that we think would be acceptable, either using other types of securities like corporate guarantees or reducing the level down to about 50%, which is what the FTA requires. And again, the goal here would be broaden the number of bidders that participate with us, and so that we can get the best bid and the best work done as we go forward. And if we do all this, just in terms of thinking about metrics, this should take that 25% MTA factor and bring it down so that just at the base of what we're working on, that should be our base case, is to at least get true cost, not cost plus 25% as a starting point when we move forward. So the second problem that we have is the inefficiency and layers of bureaucracy that create a lot of ongoing problems here. And again, a lot of this was done in terms of guarding against corruption and satisfying other stakeholders and trying to lay off different risks that might be there. The problem is that no one is ultimately responsible and properly evaluating the costs of these different protections and asking whether the benefits of the incremental protections are actually outweigh the costs. And if you don't ask that question, if the benefits outweigh the cost, you find yourself that anytime you can mitigate a risk, you're going to add another layer of bureaucracy to protect that. And I'm going to show you some examples of that in a minute. It also creates a situation where if you have different stakeholders who have different things, they could take things that they are nice to have rather than they need to have and force them into a project. And no one's there to push back and say, that's nice to have, but it's going to cost X dollars. Let's push this off because we can accomplish our goal with this need to have to ultimately bring forward the project. And so someone needs to be the arbiter as to what that is. And then, of course, all this slows down competition. So what's our fix? The first fix is for every major project to appoint a project lead, or think of it as a CEO. And even in my business, every project I have has someone that's ultimately accountable to make the decision. So if you're sitting there and someone has to decide what the scope's going to be, what a change order is going to be, or if there's an argument between different stakeholders, this person on the ground is empowered to make a decision. Right now, it needs to go up through a very convoluted process with multiple people and get stalled. And what we're suggesting is that not only we have this project lead, but that to the extent there is a deadlock between the other members of the agency that are focused on this and the project lead, it goes to the president to make the final decision, so that this is not something that drags on. There's a clear path of authority to ultimately resolve things and move things forward. The second big issue in terms of the bureaucracy is the payment process. You're in a situation now that if a question is raised on any particular invoice, the entire invoice isn't paid. So if it could be a 5% amount that's in question, but 100% of the invoice is held. So again, think about now, if you're a contractor and you know that risks exist, you now need to carry, you're paying your people, you're paying for the supplies, you're paying the goods, and yet you're not getting paid anything. So what we're recommending is that you just hold back the portion that's in dispute and fund the balance of the payment so the contractors can continue to function and be working in that mix. And again, there's only a few contractors that can actually have the staying power to wait through not getting paid, which again limits the amount of contractors that ultimately would bid. And then the other thing that's crazy is look at this change order process today, right? So, and we've had this conversation, but these changes, there's a 40-step change order process. And that's something that if you're thinking about now as a contractor, you need to go through a change order and you have to wait for 40 steps. It could take 9 months to get a change order. To make matters worse, our contract dictates that they need to continue to do the work as originally planned prior to the change order getting approved. So we're now creating a duplication of work and frustration for the teams that are doing this because they know it's all going to be torn out at the end of the day. And so that's a major challenge that needs to be addressed. One of the things that we've been piloting is a situation in which we reduce the number of people that touch a change order from what is now 17 different people to just 4. And that should be able to reduce the timeline by 80%. And that's something we're piloting right now on East Side Access, and I think it's something that we should seek to implement as quickly as possible throughout the entire agency, that we can then streamline that. Also, I believe, at the end of the day, the project CEO could be someone that is responsible to making sure that it remains streamlined and that we're responsive when change orders come in and are commercial, are thoughtful about what needs to get done from point A to point B to deliver the best product for the public on time and on budget. And the third area that we've talked about is weak project management. And I've had this conversation before, which is when we start out with a project, we really don't know what it's going to cost, right? We didn't know when Jano came in originally and told us East Side Access was going to be blank. You don't really know what East Side Access is going to cost until you go out into the marketplace and get some bids back from people. And so part of the challenge is we're working off of guesstimates and using historical metrics that we have and trying to extrapolate general metrics into what a new project is rather than being specific to what the scope of that project is. And so the thinking through the initial part alone is off. And then when we approve budgets and contracts, they're done and set out for bid with very little flexibility. And they're hyper-customized. So what that does, it limits people's ability to offer suggestions about how you would value engineer. If you say you need exactly this, and it's got to be customized to this, and someone says, I could buy this off the shelf, but they don't have the opportunity to offer that proposal, then we're going to get stuck with the highest priced item without taking the benefit of the innovation of our contractors as we move forward. So 3 recommendations on this front. The first is as we go through the early projects, let's not get focused on a price until we're ready and have a good sense of what that scope is going to ultimately be. Give the project planners the opportunity to value engineer, talk to our consultants, maybe go out for requests for information, requests for ideas, and then take the benefit of those ideas into creating the scope. The other reason that's critical is that once you really know what it's going to cost, you may say, you know what, I didn't really want to spend $2 billion on this project. I wanted to spend $1.5 billion on this project, which then drives everyone back to the drawing board before we begin the project to really think about, should we modify the scope? What else can we value engineer to get it done at the $1.5 billion, not the $2 billion as an example? The second piece is on the bids, provide flexibility and make them less prescriptive so that you can actually work with the different contractors and your consultants to value engineer, make it part of the process, and so that when you're thinking through the contract process, if the second phase is going out to get the best ideas and value engineer it as we go forward, and avoid trying to have customized products, but more try to pull things that are off the shelf. Not only does that make sense day one in terms of the cost, but it makes sense on an operating basis because if something's off the shelf, if it's broken, you can then take it off the shelf again and fix it versus having to rebuild it in a customized fashion. And then the third thing is after the bidding, we have consultants and project management teams and design consultants that are paid by the hour regardless of what their performance are. So sometimes we end up paying them to even fix their own mistakes. And so I think as part of this, we need to modify our contracts so they can be performance-based, so that we compensate people when they save us money, and we actually penalize people when they cost us money. And that performance-based contracts with our consultants and our contractors, if they're done correctly, can be means that are very productive. And they're not that different than we think about the design-build concept, right? It's negotiating that contract up front, transferring some of the appropriate risk, but giving people the benefit, but also they have skin in the game if it goes the wrong way. So those are the three main elements that we've identified that we believe we can change today. Beyond that, and for the next phase, there are elements here that we have identified that we need outside external support with, and we want to do more work in understanding what are some of the state laws that are out there and regulations that may require us to go get some legislative changes and be in a situation that next year we could pursue some of those changes, as well as sit down with organized labor to think about how can we work together to be as productive and efficient as possible in the grander scheme of changing everything that we're changing here as we go forward. So just in conclusion, and it's been said here before, these are all good ideas, but when I went back and the working group went back and looked, there were reports done in 2008, there were reports done in 2011, and a lot of these ideas were raised at that point. And so it's going to take a change in culture to actually make this implemented, and it's going to also be upon account. We need to be accountable to hold our team accountable for performing and evaluating metrics. And we should be looking at what are the metrics, how many different contractors are bidding on projects today versus what was happening before. On the projects that are going underway, are we cutting down the change order time and measuring these things? Because you're not going to be able to have a final outcome of where this is working for many years because projects take multiple years to get done. But there are interim report cards that we should be developing and that we're going to be working on in this working group that we all can be looking at to see if we're being more efficient and more user-friendly and getting the best product for the public as we go forward. I have a different degree of confidence now than maybe in 08 and 11 because we have leadership that believes in this, whether it's Pat or Andy or Phil or Kathy, they're all through the whole place. We have new leadership that want to be change agents, and I encourage you, Mr. Chairman, to encourage them to embrace this, and I would even suggest that perhaps that each group within the agency appoint someone, a senior executive, to be part of Jano's working group with us, so that everyone owns these changes and implements them in a consistent basis throughout the organization. And I end my report there.
Scott, thank you. I agree with you, and I think the most important part of this change in this strategy is changing the culture. You can have the greatest strategy in the world, but if your culture doesn't change, nothing's going to change with it. And I think that's the process that we're going down the path on some of our existing contracts, existing projects, and our newer projects to make them more efficient and more effective. And I want people here not to be afraid of change, which I think is a key element in almost every governmental entity. We need to understand that we owe it to the people of our city to get our act together so that we can keep moving people and getting them to where they need to get to, both on the contracts as well as on the project management side of it as well. Questions? Andrew?
Scott, I want to really thank you. I think that your private sector expertise and obviously brain power really led a lot, and this is
my opinion, I know it's been said before, but I think this thing is really well thought out. You've really gone into the details of why we're getting these unsatisfactory results that everybody's so upset about. And I think it's really important as fiduciaries and as board members and as the senior management sitting around this table that we really support this thing so it doesn't become an 08 and all the other years that, because it'd be a shame after identifying these things and seeing these things not to really change the culture, as Joe said here. It would be really a crime almost. It really will, because if we're going to go ahead with these huge transit projects and commuter rail projects, we have to be sure that we're getting a value for the dollar spent. Otherwise, we're going to wind up, obviously, in a very bad situation. So, a terrific report. If I may make a suggestion, though, that I would ask you to think about and maybe add into the final report. As you know, I've expressed a lot of concern about a lack of competition in the subcontractor level on certain East Side Access project procurements. I would like to ask that the Cost Containment Task Force to focus on how to create more competition among major subcontractors on our MTA projects. Electricians, plumbers, and many other trades, we are seeing the same names too often. So please include some recommendations, if you would, Scott, as you go forward in your final report on this, I think, very important matter. And as part of this, I would request that the Cost Containment Task Force, in consultation with Chief Development Officer Jano Lieber, recommend standards for how to inform the board when procurements come up for approval where there has been little or no competition at the major subcontractor level. And as you know, I've been very upset about some of these things that happened on East Side Access, and I think it's very important as fiduciaries, as part of what you said, that this board supports this effort and knows what they're really voting for. And as I've said more than once, the board needs this information in evaluating a supposedly competitive procurement. So upon consideration, I think that this would be a much more effective way than asking the Inspector General to come in here now and review the past history. I think it's going to tie up Jano's people. He's got limited resources, a lot of work. I think it's going to take efforts away from what you're trying to do. So I would like to hold the Inspector General on past history in abeyance. And if this thing goes forward the way you've shown, Scott, I think this is much more important right now to focus on this, and we need to support you. And just before I conclude, I mean, I think, I don't know if everybody saw this New York Post article last Sunday, and personally, I think this is really an affront to the fiduciaries on this board, that one of our major contractors in this East Side Access, which has been far from a successful venture for the MTA, has a situation like this happening. And I would ask Joe to do whatever we can to be sure that this thing is handled, because as personally as somebody that voted for this contract, voted for a lot of these contracts on East Side, and to have this here come out, I think it's just sticking a finger right in our face. And it's stupid, and it's something the MTA should not stand for. Thanks. And thanks, Scott, for a great job.
No, thank you. And just two quick responses. I appreciate, your confidence and shifting that focus to the working group, and we will definitely make it a priority to understand the subcontractors. And I think some of the things that I reviewed relative to the structural elements of how the contract's so unbalanced and so non-commercial, et cetera, will naturally open up the field of plays for more contractors to participate. So we'll definitely make that a priority. And the second point I want to make, I don't want to not understate this, is that what I've also seen is the team here at the MTA, when they've seen a path forward that shows that it's going to be more efficient and more productive, there's a groundswell of people that want the change. This has been frustrating for so many because everyone's handcuffed by all these, these rules and Byzantine contracts and bureaucratic procedures that ultimately, if they were relieved, could do a better job, and they want to do a better job. So it gives me a sense of encouragement.
Regarding the article that was in the New York Times regarding a former president of MTACC. Post, I said? What did I say? Times. I have the Times on my mind.
Solar system.
I don't know what it. Yeah, fine. Upon finding out of his appointment to the board of Tutor Perini, I had asked General Counsel to inform him immediately of what his requirements are under state law. We will continue to monitor that to make sure, as well as the company also understands what its responsibilities are. But in the lifetime ban that he has on anything that he's worked on, and the 2-year ban on all other issues at the MTA that he will have there, and we will pursue that diligently.
I received a letter from Dr. Herodiciano assuring me that he will live up to his obligations. I'll be happy to share that with the board.
Scott, I think your committee nailed it. This is a really great report. I especially liked the focus on allocation of risk, and I'll address that in terms of change orders. I know the board is pretty hesitant to approve change orders, especially if they're large and repetitive. But by properly allocating risk, I think we will eliminate a lot of them, because the risk has to be not always us. And I think it's not always the contractor either. But sometimes when we get large change orders, we focus on the contractor. Something I heard in both of your reports is that you are increasing communication between the MTA bureaucracy and our contractors. I think that goes a long, long way to resolving problems before they crop up. And lastly, as a participant in the 2008 study, you correctly noted that many of the same things were discussed. I think you need, and your committee needs, to take this the next step, which I think you've started to do, and that is to really address an implementation plan. Because just telling us and the bureaucracy that this is what needs to happen doesn't see that it happens. And that's what I felt the failure of the 2008 effort was. So I hope your committee continues and you work with management in order to develop a real implementation process that we can track with your metrics. Thanks.
Susan, one of the things I failed to mention, after Scott's report, was the follow-up nature of what's necessary here. It reminds me of what I gave everybody on my staff when I became deputy mayor, and they all have it they still have them in their offices in the private sector. And it's a sign that says, it's follow-up, stupid. If you put it on your to-do list, you have to get it done. This is on the to-do list. It has to get done. Polly?
I too want to compliment Scott and Chuck. I do think they hit a lot of the key problems. And look, not surprisingly, I run a transportation agency too, an order of magnitude smaller than the mighty MTA, but we have a lot of the same challenges. And, you know, for me, I'm very excited to sort of see how the MTA can tackle some of these things, because I think there'll be lessons learned for us, particularly the idea of a CEO for a project. That is a big piece of culture change, to have someone empowered enough to be able to tell all the other important people in an agency, nope, we're not making any more changes at this point, to give them more authority to deal with change orders. I would say Carl and I were just sort of saying to each other, in the city context, that proves enormously challenging. And I think if you can do it, you will save a lot of money and a lot of time. So thank you both, I think, for great work. I'm excited to continue to be a part of it. I just have to digress for 1 second, because the issue of NYPD enforcement of the bus lanes came up. And I do want to just sort of digress for a minute to once again say, always can do better, but the NYPD really is making an effort on the bus lanes. They announced last month the big crackdown. Their enforcement numbers are way up. More to do, but I think they've obviously heard a lot of the concerns and really are trying to put some focus and personnel into it. So I hope we'll continue to encourage them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to do a shout out first to Jano and his team. They did yeoman's work. When we started out under Scott's leadership, we said we weren't going to tweak the process. We were going to blow it up and start from the ground up. And with his assistance and a lot of other people's assistance, they did that, and working right up to the last minute, including this past weekend, and working on Father's Day. So I just want to, I think on behalf of all the committee, thank Jano and Zoe and everybody that's been involved with this process, because it was very complicated and granular, and it took a lot of effort and time to kind of dig through all these things to come up with the recommendations that Scott put forward today. The other thing I just want to mention, I've said this in the past, and Joe, I have all the confidence in terms of the execution and follow-up, which is key to getting these recommendations implemented. But I would also ask that the recommendations of all the 4 task forces be included and adopted in the upcoming budget that is going to be before us, because I want to see these recommendations institutionalized. It's one thing just to kind of implement them or say we're implementing them, but the budget's not just a fiscal plan, but it's also a policy document. And it clearly spells out what the mission is and what the priorities are for this agency. So I'm looking forward to and asking that the recommendations of all 4 working groups, that whatever this board deems that should be implemented going forward with your leadership, that they all be included in the budget that's presented to this board for adoption later this year.
Thank you. One thing that I was not mentioned is that, you know, one of the things that happens when you look at this and put it in the budget, the sooner we enter into a contract, the sooner we spend money. So the implications are it's not always savings. It could be speeding up. You know, obviously everything here has to deal with speed, and with speed means that we will be, you know, the need for cash and the need for the funding actually enhances itself. But the better product, the end of the day, getting online faster, anything will be well worth it.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that when we talk about culture change, the culture isn't going to be to ignore something anymore. Right. The culture change is going to be you're in violation, right, of a policy if you're not implementing it. And that's going to be part of the big culture shift. And that's why I think it's important that everyone's recommendations that this board supports are part of the budget document that we approved at the end of the year for 19.
Thank you. Benny?
So, great presentation, Scott. In the presentation, you referenced working with organized labor, and I assume that to mean working with organized labor hired by the contractors, which is a key component. So what my suggestion would be is to include in working with organized labor, working with organized labor within, and perhaps creating some competition from our own family. I think that's an important piece. We do railroad work, we do a lot of the construction that's needed, but not on such a grand scale. Maybe by working with labor internally, we could create some internal competitive competition for the work itself, because we're working side by side with the same vendors. We're working with the same contractors repeatedly. They're becoming part of the railroad family in a sense. So I think we should also gear towards looking within with our own management teams and our own departments, determine what we may be able to do, you know, to put...
Suggestion. We'll definitely include that in the next phase.
Thank you. Thank you. Jamie?
As everyone else has said, for both of these working groups, thank you so much. If we can effectuate these changes, I certainly think they'll be the most impactful things, positively impactful things that this board has done in my tenure here. Really great. 2 relatively minor suggestions. I have the luxury of not having gone through all the hard work that you guys did and then sitting here making a suggestion. It's kind of like the same thing as parenting, I suppose. One suggestion that has worked very well in my industry has a lot of parallels. If you come out with a model contract, as I suspect you will, that is much better. It may make sense to look at high dollar contracts that were already entered into and to offer the contractors the opportunity to recast their price if they're afforded the opportunity to get onto the new paper. That can be very impactful. And secondarily, on the way we pay, what's been very effective in dealing with government in my industry is if you afford the bidders the opportunity to cast on their pricing a quarterly or monthly management or some kind of fee that always gets paid unless the contract gets terminated, and then the fee for the actual work, which can work in the context of New York State law, I know. So that they know they have cash flow, and we're not feeling pressure to partial pay contracts, which can create other legal problems if we haven't received the work. So 2 very minor suggestions, but wow, for both of you guys, thank you, and those groups, thank you so much. It's really great work.
Well, thank you. Thanks both Chuck and Scott. That were really, you see, we made a lot of progress here. And I also want to thank Jano and Steve Plachocki for their involvement. Jano's really made some changes over in East Side Access. Some of the problems we hear about, it was referenced here, about some of the reason for additional work orders or even additional costs and all these things is that we don't know the condition of the stations or some of the facilities we have when we do contract. And I see there's an effort going to be made to try and do that. I think that should be emphasized, especially coming up with the next capital program. You know, we could avoid cost overruns. That certainly, whether we have a contingency or not, or maybe a lower contingency on some projects. I just wonder how that's, at some point, how that's going to be done. And because I was told this was going to be done like 30 years ago, and we're still slogging through situations where we didn't know the condition, the contractor doesn't know, the contractor then submits a higher bid thinking that they themselves got to have a large contingency because they don't know what they're getting themselves into. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges here in a way, because changing bureaucracy is something, it's difficult enough, but knowing the condition of your system seems to be a very large challenge for this agency. And in the future, I'd love to see how we're going to approach that. Thanks.
Neil?
Thank you. Of course, the thank yous. Well done. Very impressive reports. First time actually have had our colleagues present to us, and clearly the work that the staff has done to support you gentlemen has been fantastic, so thank you. This is definitely a professional, private sector quality presentation. I feel like I'm sitting in one of my own colleagues' presentations for my day job, so thank you for that. And it was a very positive report, particularly Scott's. Yours was all about the positive incentives, the carrots, if you will, for what we could provide to our partners. My question, though, is, and it often is how we discuss the outcomes of contracts gone awry at this board, whether it be Chuck or Larry discussing what we will do to contractors if they don't meet their obligations. Where have you been in your thinking about sticks? Because, again, I heard a lot about carrots, which is, I think, a positive incentive to create a win-win situation for those working with us, particularly a way to get rid of the 25% MTA premium. But sticks, have we been thinking about that, and is that on the roadmap, if you will?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, if you remember, when we talked about performance incentives, it was performance where they can participate in the savings, but also be punitive penalties to the extent there's cost or overruns or delays that are there. The other thing that we've talked about that we haven't dug into fully, but as we increase the span of contractors and subcontractors that are participating, is creating a ranking system. And just like you see when people now, from Airbnb, Uber, that everyone in the stakeholders that are involved can provide rankings in terms of performance, in terms of meeting our stakeholders' needs, in terms of how they engage and communicate internally and externally, come up what are the metrics that are both hard metrics and soft metrics that we think would be important, and be able to have a ranking system of the different contractors and subcontractors. So in future projects and throughout the agency, we all have the benefit of seeing that, and then hopefully that ranking system encourages the highest, best performance from the contractors. So that was the other idea that we were kicking around.
Peter, did you have? No. Then on to Chuck.
First, I would like to congratulate Scott for a superb job. But what he said underscores what, in my view, is a remarkable aspect of what you have heard today. In the 8 years that I have been on this board, this is the first time that a chairman has used the skills of people who know the real world and who know what has to be done. Scott Reckler is one of the preeminent developers in the New York area, and one who has a heart as well as a mind and ability. But Joe Loda is the first chairman who has harnessed the skills of the people on this board, and I think he deserves enormous credit for having done that.
Alan All would be very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I, like everybody else, I'm impressed with both reports and pleased that we're going in this direction. Scott said in the beginning of his report that we have to be careful about an approaching tipping point. I think that's something that we have to continually remind ourselves of. We don't want to be in a place where the failure of our transportation system impacts our ability to be the preeminent metropolitan area in the country. And I think it's clear that it could impact us in exactly that way if we don't do the right thing over the next decade. Bureaucracies form not as an event, but as a process over a period of time. This is no different. When I hear the report and I think about all the people that I've come in contact with at MTA, it leads me to want to make the following comments. One, I am continually impressed with the quality of the people that work here. I am continually impressed with the fact that despite the bureaucracy and the challenges of lack of funding and dealing with an antiquated system, despite the fact that the amount of riders over the last 20 years has increased so dramatically, that they find a way to get most everything right, not most everything wrong. Despite their Herculean efforts, we've gotten to the point that we're in. And when we talk about the kind of changes that we have to make to modernize the system, to streamline the system, and to make it better, I want to be clear that I don't think anybody on this board means that in a way to diminish the work of the people that are here. It's my experience that the people that are here want to modernize, want to change, want to make the system better. And I think it's up to us as leaders to give them solutions and to force the implementation of solutions and to change culture. That's why I think, Joe, it's so important that you're taking the direction you're taking and that you're trying to unlock the value of some of the people that are on this board. So I'm very, very impressed and very, very encouraged by everything that I hear today. And I'm hopeful that we can begin to change this bureaucracy. And the last comment I would make is that changing bureaucracies is not an event either. It's a process. And hopefully, in the process of changing this bureaucracy, we'll get it right, and we'll make sure that we continue to recognize the people that work at MTA are rewarded for the high-quality work that they do. So thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chuck. And thank you to everybody involved in the process.
Thank you, Peter. Change is, someone told me a long time ago, change is the only constant. But what they fail to say in that process is the fear that people have in change. And we have to work on that, dealing with that fear. Once we can alleviate or eliminate or mitigate, whatever the right word is, the fear, I think you'll see a lot of progress come from that. And that's what we need to do, working with our unions at every level here. So much of this organization is represented, and we need to work with the leadership and all of the unions to understand that at the end of the day, it'll be a better day. And I think it's important that we begin that process because it is a process. It's not a big bang where all of a sudden one day it just changes. But every day, incrementally getting closer and closer to the goal. And then changing it again once we get there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also wanted to give my thanks to the two chairs for the working group's outstanding work. When I worked here 20 years ago, I was part of a group that was called Cost and Schedule, so I'm glad to see that's coming back. We also had some of our GOs were terribly onerous and on our customers, And so the Transit Authority gave incentives for early completion, and of course penalties for non-compliance. I wonder if that's still something that's being considered. And I can hope that we can do a much better job going forward and save some money. Thank you.
Talking about on time, it reminds me, I'll remind everyone that this Sunday will be the first Sunday in quite a long time that the number 2 and 3 train will be going through the Clark Street Tunnel. For those of you who live in Lower Manhattan or in downtown Brooklyn, it'll be back this weekend. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you again, Chuck and Scott, for your presentations. Very, very well done. Now, I'd like to take a moment first to congratulate everyone who worked so hard and so long to make fair fares a budgetary reality in New York City. I want to give a special thanks to our colleague, an MTA board member, David Jones, who is president of the Community Service Society, who championed this cause right from the very, very beginning. Fair fares, which, as I've said before, is not going to have a financial impact on the MTA, but it's a great way, absolutely great way to help New Yorkers who are the most vulnerable. We are working with New York City on its implementation. We will continue to work with New York City and how they distribute the appropriate Metro cards. Next, I'd like to say a few words about my friend Steve Morello, who miraculously left the room. Where'd he go? He's over there in the corner. He's already moving away, for thanking us for this is his last board meeting. Steve is retiring at the end of this month. Still on schedule, is it? Okay, right. At the end of this month, after being 6 years here as counselor to the chair, and after a long and storied career in state and city government, where he served as spokesperson, starting with Governor Hugh Carey and 2 other subsequent governors, and also served 2 mayors. His wisdom, counsel, his sense of humor, his friendship to me has been invaluable, and I can go on and on and on about his many contributions. But as he normally sits over here, the thing I would fear the most is, hey, Lodi, your 2 minutes are up. And I hear a buzzer. And so, on behalf of everyone at the MTA, Steve, I'd like to simply thank you and sincerely thank you for your service. You are going to be missed, and we will be calling on you quite frequently in your retirement. As also in that mode, as many of you know, John Malloy officially has resigned from the board as Nassau County's representative. John was appointed to the MTA board in 2013. We'll take this opportunity to thank him for his 5 years of dedicated service to the MTA and always looking out for the best interests of our riders and our customers. And as a new representative is appointed, I'll make sure that you all are contacted. There are 2 items in the newspapers or in other news outlets today that I would like to address. First, we've been hearing reports over and over again, day in and day out, about transit workers being attacked by members of the public. These assaults, I believe, are unacceptable. They are abhorrent, and I do believe that an attack on any one of them is an attack on all of us. We will continue to do everything in our power to keep our workers safe. We will work with the unions and making sure that that happens. I do want to remind everyone, and as well the public, assaulting a transit worker is now a Class D felony. Violators should be prosecuted, I believe, to the full extent of the law. I will work with the district attorneys and expect those found guilty of this crime to serve the time that goes along with a Class D felony. And finally, let me go back to my written notes from this morning. Yesterday, I became aware, the second item, I became aware that 5 years ago a Metro North worker attended a masquerade party in blackface. At the time, Metro North management did nothing. In fact, subsequently, he was in fact promoted in spite of this unacceptable behavior. Both his actions and the lack of action by MTA management at the time, I believe, is reprehensible. Kathy Rinaldi, our new president of Metro North, has ordered a complete review and investigation of this case, as well as reinforcing that there will be no retaliation for workers reporting any acts of discrimination like this. The employee in question was and is still represented by a union. We will work with our labor partners to ensure that all understand what our expectations are, and that actions like this, they understand, are unacceptable, and that employees that participate in actions like this and those employees who cover up actions like this have no place at the MTA. Let me give you my personal point of view, which it hasn't come across yet, you should hear. I believe wearing blackface is racist. Those who decide to wear blackface are maintaining, I believe, a legacy of marginalizing and dehumanizing African Americans. Again, this action is racist, and it has no place whatsoever, not only at the MTA, but in our society. The MTA has a long and proud history of championing diversity, and I want to ensure that it continues, and that this act of this employee will not reduce our progress in eliminating racism and discrimination in our workplace as well as throughout our society. And with that, I will end my comments and take any questions or comments from the board before we go on to the regular meeting. Yes, Mitch?
On the note relating to Commissioner Malloy, I know John's not here, but I want to thank John personally, being the other Long Islander on the board, representing Suffolk County, for his guidance over the last number of years, for his expertise, for his soft-spokenness, for his ideas, which he gave to me because he knows I have a big mouth. But he's been a great friend, a great board member over the years, and he will be missed by all of us. And I know I speak on behalf of the entire board and wish him best wishes in his retirement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hear, hear. Anything else? Yes. Ira?
I too want to very briefly say thank John Malloy for his years of service. I did rely on him greatly, especially as an engineer. I felt that his support and his comments were very, very valuable to me on numerous topics. So I want to thank John. I want to thank John. He's not here, but I hope he's listening. Thank you.
I'll make sure he hears it as well. Yes. Commissioner Zuckerman?
I would hate to mix two very different comments at once. I did appreciate John's partnership. He actually used to sit in this seat right here, and actually, given that I commute out of Nassau County in some of the summer, he showed me the Special Atlantic Terminal way of getting here to the MTA board meeting, which was a very expeditious way of getting here versus Penn Station. However, much more mindful of the more important comment I need to make in some ways, which is, Joe, given the horrific news that we heard via the New York Post today about this case and the blackface situation, two things I'd ask. One, as a board, I would love to be informed before the press receives this kind of information about this kind of level of abhorrent behavior. And secondly, more importantly, while John was the chair of our diversity committee, and therefore we do not have a chair right now, I would very much like to ask that this topic be remanded to that committee to understand what we're going to do across the entire agency in terms of tolerance levels and behavioral modifications and or consequences for this kind of behavior, and how we're communicating that across by represented and non-represented staff. It is too important of a situation to have heard it through the news, nor is it, and it is too important to not see a conversation about what we're going to do about it. And it's great we're going to do it with Metro North. I want to see it across the entire agency.
But I will also be, at very shortly appointing a new chair for the diversity committee. And I apologize for the, I've been trying to get as much information to the board as possible in articles. The article, I've been following on the one issue that was in the Post today, which is about transit workers being attacked by the public. That's been an ongoing issue that's on out there, but it's gotten to a point where what happened yesterday and the involvement with the union now asking for cameras, it's become a point. And I recall this happened 5 years ago as well. This has gone in a cycle, and it's going in the wrong direction. So, and I will make sure that we are able to get information to the board quite quickly. Regarding the Metro North situation, yes, I agree with you. I found out about it yesterday. Should have informed you immediately, and I apologize. I know on each one of your desks is a copy of the email that Kathy sent out to all of the members of Metro North. I'll make sure that simultaneously with the employees get it, the board members get it as well. Larry?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and say, irrespective of whether you got to us yesterday or today about this, I want to thank you and Kathy for actually taking this up and not letting it lie. That goes very far in that I really do believe that this board and this agency has to have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to whether it's this or any other kind of anti-whatever, whether it's sexism, sexual harassment, or any other kinds of acts of bias. We have to have a zero tolerance policy, and irrespective racism or sexism or anything else, there's no, as far as I'm concerned, statute of limitations. Wrong is wrong, and the fact that you and Kathy jumped on it right away and are taking action, corrective action, is, I just want to say thank you. It's greatly appreciated, and I think that's got to be our standard operating procedure, regardless of the incident that occurs in this agency. Thank you.
The despicable behavior that you mentioned came to the awareness of the committee late last night or early this morning, and I've heard from nearly every member of Metro North Committee. We are uniform in the distress we feel that someone working for Metro North behaved in that manner. But I want the record to show that I have worked with Metro North employees and management for many, many years, even preceding when I served here on the board. And that behavior does not represent anything I have seen in the employees and management of Metro North ever. It's, to me, very sad that this had to happen this way, but it does not reflect my view of Metro North.
Thank you, Susan. That's the shocking part of it, because it doesn't represent. And as Kathy's letter said, that she was shocked, as was I, in that organization that this came out, and the cover-up that was involved. That it was completely unacceptable.
I wanted to say a few words about your comments about the rising attack on transit workers. This is really an intolerable situation. These folks are out there serving the public every day, and I think we ought to have a program where you can report attacks on transit personnel, and maybe there ought to be car cards to that effect or something, because they're out there every day for us, and it's just ridiculous that somebody should do what happened on the Q train, for instance, yesterday. It's intolerable, and we shouldn't allow it.
We will, and we will work with the in this particular case, because of where it happened, but work with the UFT on a program both for reporting on the part of employees and the public as well. Yes.
I just, Mr. Chairman, want to associate myself with your comments on both of these attacks on our employees and our position, very strong position, as you expressed, regarding the how totally unacceptable racism in any form is here, and I think that's the unanimous and consensus view of everyone in the entire board. And I would just suggest that your comments be expanded to represent the consensus view of this board as a whole.
We've spent a good deal of time talking about the actions of the individual who did those reprehensible actions. But I want to just spend a moment to say that those employees who are brave enough and bold enough to bring this to the attention of their peers, their supervisors, and the larger management structure should always feel that they can do that. And I don't know how, if these individuals felt that they were supported. I know that this is a key a priority of Kathy as well, and I'm sure of the chairman, to make sure that employees always feel that they have the support. But I want to impress that I think that I also agree that that should be a priority. We can never have our employees feel as though they have brought an action on any action, or I'm sorry, of any nature to our attention, and it is not properly addressed, and they do not feel properly supported. And I just wanted to take a moment to highlight that in particular.
Thank you, Joe. I noticed that the president of Local 100, John Samerson, was calling for body cameras and for cab cameras.
Utano was calling for body cameras and/or cameras on the in the cabs. Unfortunately, the cameras in the cabs are not going to capture everything as much as, but we'll work with them.
Do we think cameras present some kind of a solution to this, as a deterrent and as a tool to catch people afterwards?
I think it would be it can be a deterrent. It would be a deterrent if we properly tell the world that they're carrying cameras so that somebody doesn't turn around and hit one of our workers. And it will allow for the proper enforcement and prosecution of those because we'll have their picture. I think it goes a long way. I mean, unions have changed their approach towards cameras over the last couple of years because I think they've come to understand it will help them more than it will hurt them. And I think that's an important part of it. I mean, we've seen that with here in New York City with the PBA and with other police departments around the country. They're now encouraging their officers to wear cameras. So I think the same thing would happen here.
A solution that's worked in the hotel industry has been the implementation of a panic button type of device that's geared to immediately alert the right people in a hotel if an event takes place in a guest room or something like that. I'm wondering if, and they're not expensive, by the way, and I'm wondering if some such sort of device could be provided to MTA employees. Again, I think it serves two purposes. One, it's a deterrent when people know that there's a device that can be activated to instantly bring the authorities to a location. And two, I think it gives a high level of certainty that we're going to catch offenders. So I would recommend that you at least take a look at that because
Sure.
it's cost effective.
Sure, we have.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No, please.
In addition to some of the things we did yesterday, calls were made to the NYPD and how important it is to have uniform presence down there. We realize it's, there are only so many officers, but and there are so many stations. But what's really, uniquely different, we do have panic buttons for the cars, for our drivers and engineers where they can communicate directly to the RCC, which in turn, inside the RCC, NYPD is located, so they're aware of it, can dispatch. A little bit different than a closed environment because, it's generally down in the subway system itself or up on the L. But be that as it may, I fully understand that, and we will enhance that, and we'll take that into consideration as well. I have to look at what's being put into the new cars as we buy the new cars. What kind of devices can be used in there to also notify both the police as well as our rail control center that there's been an incident.
I'd just like to address your remarks earlier. I'm delighted that you took such a strong stance. Last week, I had the privilege of hosting a lunch for 6 of the Little Rock 9, who had come to my union's office in 1959 when they had finished with their first year of school to receive an award and to spend a week in New York to get out of Little Rock. A couple of them had interned in our office later on, and one of them interned at our law firm for a while. And they all went on to have remarkable lives. There's a play being done about their lives, an off-Broadway show, and all of them happened to be in New York, and so we were able to get together and meet them some 60 years later. I was really struck by the common theme that they all were so totally outraged that
things that people would only whisper about in corners just a few years ago, they say openly and out loud today. And that the ugly head of racism has reared itself. It's more public now than it's been. And they express their fear that as a society we're going backwards. The only way that we don't go backwards is if those of us of goodwill are willing to be very strong and very public in our condemnation of people who behave this way. And so I want to thank you for your leadership.
I want to echo the comments that you made and Peter's points to it. And I want to just also put in a different area where I think we got to be vigilant on, which is what's happening right now in terms of our border policy, which I think is inhumane. When you think about New York, we're the largest city of immigrants. We wouldn't be New York if it wasn't for our immigrants. And I just hope that we're vigilant in our system, making sure that people feel protected and safe, whether they're a dreamer or not, in our working force or one of our passengers, because right now I think there's a tremendous amount of insecurity out there, and I think that just as we've been vigilant and outspoken on this issue, there's no room for us to not be as vigilant on that. I think there's, in terms of people attacking our employees, racism, or attacking immigrants, this is not who we are or our agency should be. So I'm glad we're speaking out, but I think we got to even raise the bar on immigrants right now.
Mr. Chairman, at Monday's meetings, I made the point on transit that the statistics showed an unfortunate increase in incidents of racial bias in the subways against African Americans. Over the course of the past few months, we have seen increases periodically of anti-Semitic incidents, of anti-Hispanic incidents, of anti-African American incidents, and gay bashing, and others. And the point I sought to make then and would make now, I think our police department makes every effort to try and deal with these hate crimes and these hateful attitudes on the part of those scum who crawl out from under the rocks from time to time and are emboldened to do horrible and hateful things. But I do think one area that clearly has to be focused upon is that we need to make sure that those who prosecute do their jobs and those who are charged on the bench with enforcing the law wake up and enforce the law to the full extent of the law to make sure these vermin do not strike again.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was looking at my phone because I wanted to get a quote from George Washington about was his views when he was President of the United States that basically, I'm going to paraphrase it, but that a government which bigotry gives no sanction and goes on and on and on. We seem to have forgotten that at the White House and all the way down, and that needs to change.
Joe, yeah. I'm kind of disappointed you pulled a quote out from a slaveholder to sort of, I don't know. I've been
my fault. And
I've been struggling with this for quite a while with the sort of how we idolize the founding fathers, particularly with regard to Thomas Jefferson, who we idolize as a founder of freedom, and disregard entirely how he treated his slave Sally Hemings, who we entirely ignore. Today's the 20th of June. Yesterday was Juneteenth. Should be a national holiday. Slavery was there at the foundation of our society. Slavery in America was based on racism. While slavery is a historic thing in the world, it's based on racism in America. And I urge us not to view this particular incident as entirely aberrant, and I wish it was just one asshole. It's not. This is a strong current in our society. It will take many years to correct something that's been 300 years in the making. It'll take a lot of work to unscrew this country.
Norman, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think, though, we have to work towards the goal of making sure that we can all live together equally and free. It's as simple as that. And I will do my part to do that and to make it known what my feelings are about my fellow New Yorkers and Americans, and to be Americans as well.
I'll get you a good book of Frederick Douglass quotes.
And some Sojourner Truth quotes.
Kathy raised her hand during the discussion on Metro North. If I can give her an opportunity, and then we'll get on to the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep this brief only because so much of what I want to say has been said by board members already. First, I saw these photos for the first time last week, and I was appalled by them. I was shocked by them. There's really, I cannot convey to you how upset I was when I saw these photos for the first time. You'll recall that 2 months ago, we honored one of our Metro North employees, Brian Geary, who actually put his own life at risk by breaking into a car and helping somebody who was in a car accident. To me, he represents the best of Metro North and what I would like to see in my employees. And when I see images like this, I mean, this really does not in any way reflect Metro North's core values. I was tremendously disturbed by this. I want to make sure that the board understands that. I want to convey to the Metro North Committee my apologies for not letting them know about this ahead of time. I was up until 11 o'clock, like a lot of people actually watching the story, but I should have given you a heads up that it was coming, and I apologize for that. For me, one of the biggest takeaways from last night's broadcast was the fact that there are employees at Metro North who don't feel like they can come forward with allegations of racism, and to Veronica's point, that's completely unacceptable. I'm deeply, deeply concerned by that, and that is something that I own and I need to change. There needs to be a healthy reporting culture at Metro North. That's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of conduct like this. I think we've made good progress on the safety front by trying to promote a better reporting culture, introducing C3RS. I think we need to make additional efforts at Metro North and probably across the entire MTA family to encourage that kind of a reporting culture, because it's only by doing that, only by encouraging people to come forward, only by doing thorough investigations of these kinds of allegations of really despicable conduct, that we're going to be able to change and move the dial and eradicate racism in the workforce. So you have my commitment that I am committed to that. And, and just I cannot, again, convey to you how disturbing this is to Metro North and the entire Metro North leadership.
Kathy, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Now on to our regular meeting. The minutes of May's meeting have been distributed to all of the members. Are there any corrections or omissions? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve. Second? This item's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Let's begin with a report for the Committee on Finance. Commissioner Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee met on Monday and reports on the following. There is one action item for board approval. The action item requests the board authorize actions relating to the payment of the state assessment on the MTA and its constituent agencies for the Public Work Enforcement Fund for calendar year 2018. The committee recommends this action item, and I move it.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? No. There being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 3 non-competitive procurements in the amount of $3.8 million. These procurements do not include the PWC procurement presented at committee. The committee requested the staff bring the PWC procurement back to committee for a vote at a later date. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Yep.
There are 2 competitive procurements in the amount of $3.7 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second it. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 3 ratifications in the amount of $15.6 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 10 real estate action items this month described on pages 51 through 70 of the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them.
I will second it. Are there any questions or comments?
Hold on.
Mr. Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to be marked as recused on the ATM item.
Very well. So noted. Any other questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries.
This concludes the Finance Committee report.
Thank you. And now on to the Transit Committee report from Commissioner Ferrer.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Transit and Bus Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There's one action item for board approval. The action item requests the board approve the proposal to redesign the Staten Island Express bus network to better match ridership demands while improving trip speeds and reliability. The action item is on pages 71 through 109 of the Director's Desk version of the board book, and a hard copy has been distributed for this meeting. In addition, the public can find a video about this redesign on the MTA website. The committee recommends this action item, and I move it.
I second it. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Albert. Commissioner.
Thank you. I spoke in favor of the Staten Island bus redesign at Transit Committee, and I've heard the public comments. I think it's really important that buses be routed to either downtown or midtown and not have to traverse the island of Manhattan, which takes an inordinate amount of time. As we know, congestion is not good at this time. I'm wondering if, and maybe Peter or someone else can answer, the elimination of certain stops on the island now makes the approximate distance to the nearest bus stop how much longer than it had been prior to this? Can somebody answer that?
Darryl. Peter? Peter Caffiero is coming to the table.
So the current average spacing is about a quarter mile. It'll go to about 0.4 of a mile. We estimate that it's additional 1 to 5 minutes walking, depending on where you're coming from. Since most people aren't actually at an existing stop, they're walking from other areas.
And were origin and destination studies done for a lot of these folks?
We looked at the origin and destinations of the routes and the customers in the route redesign, correct. That is true.
All right, thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Motion has been seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
There are 5 competitive procurements in New York City Transit for $81.1 million, and they are on pages 110 through 124 of the Director's Desk version of the board book distributed for this meeting. Committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? They carry.
There is one ratification for New York City Transit for $3.5 million on pages 125 and 126 of the Director's Desk version of the board book distributed for this meeting. Committee recommends this ratification, and I move it.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Ratification carries.
And that concludes the committee's report.
Thank you. Now on to the report from the Joint Long Island Railroad and Metro North Committee, which will be given by Dr. Metzger.
The Metro North Railroad Committee and the Long Island Railroad Committee met jointly this month, and we report the following. Our procurements begin on page 127 of the board book. There is one non-competitive procurement for this month for Long Island Railroad for $961,000. The committee recommends this procurement. I move it.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? There being none, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Carries.
There are 8 competitive procurements this month. One for Long Island Railroad for $14.3 million, 5 for Metro North Railroad in the amount of $8.6 million, and 3 for MTA Capital Construction for $58.9 million. The committee recommends these procurements. I move them.
I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? Commissioner Alford.
Yeah, are we talking about the Hartsdale and Scarsdale station rehabs at this time? Is that part of what you're moving? Okay, so my question is, from a service-related point of view, will both stations be worked on simultaneously, or will you work on one and then work on the other?
Kathy?
That's actually a good question. I'm not sure the answer for that. I can get back to you with that. I mean, they're both complete platform replacements, so we're taking advantage of an existing schedule change to be able to support the work. With the exact phasing of the work, I can get back to you with that information.
Thank you.
Will you get back to all of us? Thank you.
Questions been seconded? Other items been seconded? Other no further questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carry.
There are 2 ratifications this month for MTA Capital Construction for $3 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
I'll second them. Any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ratifications carry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This concludes the joint railroad presentation.
And now on to the Bridges and Tunnels Committee report by its chair, Commissioner Merdler.
Mr. Chairman, the Bridges and Tunnels Committee met on Monday, and I report the following. There is one non-competitive procurement this month totaling $2.4 million. The committee recommends this procurement, and I move it.
And I'll second it. Are there any questions or comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, there are 4 competitive procurements this month totaling $28.2 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
And I'll second it. Questions or comments? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ratification carries.
Mr. Chairman, there are no ratifications this month, and this concludes the Bridges and Tunnels Committee report.
As a reminder, our next board meeting is July 25th. Before I entertain a motion to adjourn, are there any other questions, comments, or new business? So moved. There being none, I'll entertain that motion. So moved, seconded. See you next month. Thank you all very, very much. Wow, we almost had 11 o'clock. It's only 11:15. Good morning, everyone. It's rare to say that to you.
Got any opening statements, or you just want to take a question?
Just questions?
Okay. Anybody got a question? Yeah,
We'll go right down the line. Good.
So I have a question about the bus redesigns. So the Staten Island redesign, obviously went through the board today, but it was originally announced in 2015, and there was talk that it was going to be published in 2016. It obviously took much longer than that to get there, and now in the fast forward plan, or in the bus plan, there's been a outline that we want to redesign every borough in a timely fashion. What have you seen are some of the biggest challenges with redesigning a network, and what are you concerned that you're able to do it in the time frame that you've allotted to?
I'll let Andy talk at length, but I will tell you the first time through is always the longest and the most difficult. It allows you an opportunity to look at whatever the pitfalls are. I think every subsequent one will go easier and faster based on what we learned in the prior one. And with that, Andy?
Thank you, Chairman. I agree entirely with the Chairman that that's been a very good learning process for us, Finn. It's given us a great insight into the best way to go about consulting. I think the real strengths of it were the fact that we involved bus operators, people who actually drive the routes, who hear the customer feedback firsthand, who know where the existing problems are with where the problems are with the existing routes, who talk to the customers daily. So I think that's good practice. I think the fact that we have done extensive consultation with the community in a series of town halls and open houses is also good practice. And we are very confident that we can now move on to the other 4 boroughs within the 3 years stipulated within the Fast Forward plan. That program's already underway, and that commences with the Bronx.
Morning, Chairman. In regard to the incidents with the worker assaults and the racial bias incidents, you guys talked a lot this morning about how you can fix that. I'm just wondering, realistically, what can workers expect to see in the next few weeks or the next month, and in terms of actual policy and progress in moving this forward, and how much do you think that will cost the agency?
So we started back in 2012 something called Transit Watch. I think we need to refresh that and dust it off. That was a whole program that was put in place between management at the Transit Authority and the Transit Workers Union on getting that forward. You know, yesterday the union for the first time threw on the table cameras, where you know we're going to continue to look at that and try to determine. I think it's a great idea. We don't know the cost yet. But I think what's really important is making the public aware that this seems to be increasing, and making the public, the majority of which are nowhere near the bad guys in this situation, to let them be part of the solution and making sure that when they see something, they say something.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, perhaps an update on the reinvention plan, moving it forward, when it might start, and do you feel that Albany has gotten the message, since it still seems they may be micromanaging you a bit? You can debate that word if you want, with a bill to you know, add more transfers on things, or to require a public hearing 90 days if a station is going to be closed. Are they getting the message? And an update on the
Sure. So as I reported at the Transit Committee on Monday, there's a huge amount of activity happened just within the past 4 weeks since we launched Fast Forward. It's an absolute hive of industry right now at Transit across all departments. We've held kick-off meetings for every department. We've identified owners at executive level, sponsors for each of the main areas, and we've identified individual project managers for each of the myriad work streams. So, you know, there's a huge amount of individual activities within the plan, and a lot of what can be done right now, and a lot of what should be done can be done right now. So we're already the plan is already underway. There are big ticket items in that plan for which additional funding will be required, particularly the re-signaling effort and the push to make the system as accessible as it can be. But I've already been up to Albany and started that dialogue with legislatures to get the funding that we need. But an awful lot of what needs to be delivered can be done right now. So we're already underway. We're looking at the existing capital program to move money about, again, so that we don't lose momentum, so that we get started straight away. And what I call an all-out focus on the basics is already happening. So, you know, at the end of the day, I don't expect to just be handed the additional money. You've got to make the case for it. Fast Forward does that. But certainly, in the interim, there's a huge amount of activity going on. We're well advanced already.
I would never call legislating micromanagement. It's what they're supposed to do. Daily News has no questions. Next.
I do. It was a good quote I was getting down by hand. I wanted to ask to follow up on the subway performance report on Monday. You have the subway action plan. It's been in full force now. You have the full funding, and the subway action plan that's supposed to stop the big meltdowns is not stopping the big meltdowns. How come?
The meltdowns are slowing from where they were. This was a process that took 20 plus years to get into place. I never said you'd be able to turn it around over time. There are certain events, whether it's weather related or power related, that seems to make for unique situations. But there's no question that the rate of growth is in reverse when it comes to these major shutdowns.
I'd like to follow up, but if just on that, when you say, you know, it's not supposed to be an overnight thing, but it is a short-term fix. So what is then short-term to you in terms of putting it down so that you're not seeing these 85 major incidents?
Short-term is to stabilize the system, to stabilize it. There has never been a time in the history of the subway system, going back to 1904, that there hasn't been some level of problem related to mechanical issues of any sort or type, and you can go back and look at the data on it. So that, you know, the whole point of me saying that is that we needed to stabilize the system so that we could then begin the process of creating a new system. That was the whole point. Creating a modern day system, which was really at the heart of Andy's Fast Forward plan. And so we'll get to the point of stabilization and then move into the next stage of trying to create a 21st century system.
Yeah, I mean, the number of major incidents does remain stubbornly high. That is true. Let's look at last night as an example, though. A lot of the time, incidents. Where incidents occur, where and when they occur, and what they are, the nature of those incidents, does impact upon that measure, that metric of the quantum of major incidents. Last night is a classic example. We're going into the evening peak on the L line, everything looked fine, and then we get a very complicated suicide on the L line, which completely shut us down for nearly 2 hours on a major section of that L line. So, these things do happen on subways, but the main thing for me is that you relentlessly focus on basics to get better. So let's just talk about Subway Action Plan then. And this will form the basis for a more detailed presentation that I will give in July. But these are just some headlines. Weekday major incidents have decreased by 10.4% since the Subway Action Plan was initiated. When incidents occur, we're responding more quickly. With the advent of the CAT teams, the Combined Action Teams, response times have decreased by 19%. Incident resolution time by 28%. Mean distance between failure in terms of rolling stock performance has substantially increased and improved. We've improved wrench time in terms of the efficiency of overnight work by more than 40%, which is 3.28 hours prior to November 2017, 5.03 hours post-November. We've improved elevator availability since the introduction of the SAP. So we're not saying that the job is finished, and the whole point of SAP was that it was a year-long program to stabilize the system, to get it back to a reasonable level of reliability, and I think those statistics show that we are actually achieving that objective. There's more to do, and the Fast Forward plan will build on the stability that we deliver.
Let's talk for a minute about the accessibility component of the Fast Forward plan. There was a lot of talk the other day, the hiring of Alex. I know, Andy, you've used the phrase quick wins in a general sense. Accessibility, you're not going to build an elevator today, but let's look at what quick wins can you accomplish, can the authority accomplish in the short term on the accessibility?
On the piece of accessibility. Okay, so and this formed part of the interview process. Actually, we did talk to candidates about what they saw as a potential quick wins. So I would say quick wins include making elevators more available. The existing fleet of elevators, make sure that they're more reliable. That where an elevator does go out of service for whatever reason, that we're exponentially better at keeping customers informed. Real time via members of staff, but also through better apps and through better information put onto those apps. Making improvements in terms of sensitivity training for staff, and that again is part of the Fast Forward plan. We're going to provide sensitivity training to all employees by making sure that bus ramps and lifts, particularly lifts, work properly. So increasing our focus on the circle checks that operators do before the starts of their shifts. So that plus things like addressing the foundational issues of we were struggling with elevator mechanics. We just couldn't attract them in the first place and retain them because the private sector typically paid more. We've already addressed that with a structural change, namely that we've changed the rate at which they're paid. So we're now able to both attract them and retain them. So I think there's a whole raft of activities that will make improvements in the short term. Those are already underway. That will be a key focus of the accessibility advisor, Alex, that I appointed. And the reason for appointing him, we're all busy, was to have one person whose job is to obsess about that and to keep me focused on that key item. So his job across all of my departments, across all of the projects, is to drive forward those initiatives in consultation with the accessibility advocacy community.
Paul? Hi. There was a lot of talk today about streamlining the contracting process, improving capital construction. I was just wondering, there was also talk about incentive payments and liquidated damages or penalties. Sure. I was just wondering, again, with the L train shutdown, the $410,000 a day liquidated damages on that project, how effective do you think the liquidated damages will be in making sure that the project finishes on schedule?
I think it'll be enormously helpful. I mean, when we did the first tunnel for the and in the R train. We had penalties as well as incentives, and it did come in ahead of schedule, just a little bit. You know, it was on budget, just a smidgen under budget, but clearly ahead of schedule. And that that I believe was a result of good planning as well as a result of the incentives that are involved. Carrots and sticks work. And I think the discussion today, you know, one thing that was missed in that discussion is that many of the recommended changes that Commissioner Reckler talked about have already started with our work on third track out on Long Island. Many of those, you know, somebody in charge, a CEO in charge, as well as what we're doing on more streamlined contracts have been put in place. We're starting it already. And I think it's very, very important. I mean, the whole point of asking the board members to become involved was I know their background in the private sector is going to be very, very helpful for the people who have been here at the MTA to be able to bring in what their experience has been. I mean, that's a critical part of it. Looking at the board and the members of the board and what we can do and what we can learn from them, I think is very, very important.
And on the actual liquidated damages side, do you anticipate, should it run over, the MTA actually collecting some damages to the tune of $410,000 a day?
It's not going to go over, but if it does, we will collect.
Thank you.
Andrew.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned in the meeting that the lack of action by Metro North. Let me start that again. You mentioned in the meeting that the lack of action by Metro North was reprehensible. In your view, what should the action have been?
Immediately that there should have been an investigation. What happened? What discipline, if any, should have been, you know, within the guidelines of the collective bargaining agreement that the employee worked under. But more importantly, and I think that what was equally as reprehensible was the fact that nothing was done. It was brought to the attention of management at the time, none of whom are here, brought to their attention, and they didn't do anything about it. And then when he was promoted, nothing happened. I mean, it was a breakdown all the way along the way. That culture needs to change. I believe that culture is changing with Kathy Rinaldi. It will continue to change as we enhance both our HR and employee relations departments, working with labor, working with all of our workers to understand what it is we need to do as a public agency and how we represent ourselves to the public, including what we do in private.
And as a quick follow-up to that, even though the incident itself was 5 years ago, in your view, should that incident itself still be investigated?
I think the incident does need to be investigated to fully understand what happened and what happened internally. We may have restrictions on what we can do that, you know, if under the existing collective bargaining agreement, we should have done something within 30 or 60 days, whatever that specific agreement, to be able to take action with the employee. We may be precluded from that due to the labor agreement that we have. But that does not say we cannot do an investigation, because I think there's a lot to learn from this, a lot to learn about what not to do. And that's what we really have to figure out. What happened? Why didn't it happen the way it should have happened the correct way? And what we can do from a training point of view throughout all of the agencies at the MTA to make sure it never happens again. New York 1.
All right,
Not done. Okay. Thank you all. Have a great 4th of July. Thank you. Don't forget to